Emily Smith, and I'm the Executive Director, and it's a real pleasure to have you all here tonight. I just want to say a couple things about the exhibition and then introduce Tom. But this is the last week of Forrest Kelly's exhibition, Michael, and if you had a chance to read the didactic and look around, you'll know that it's a project that he did, that he actually continues to work on, where he is considering his Uncle Michael, who was a gay man who committed suicide when Forrest was really young, and he thinks about Michael's adult life as being framed by Stonewall and the HIV crisis. So get back to Stonewall connection here. But for Forrest, it was an opportunity to really try to understand his uncle, try to make a connection with someone he only knew as a child, and to find moments that he felt signified his uncle's joyful life. He was really bothered by the fact that for his family, the narrative around his uncle was one of someone who was sad and depressed, and instead he wanted to really recognize how his uncle was actually happy. And so what you're looking at in the room is a combination of things. The tall film strips that you see dotted around the walls are actually his uncle's film strips that he scanned and is included in the show. The larger images, especially the ones with the individuals in them, are images that Forrest has reenacted, reframed, reimagined. So he's taken his uncle's writings. His uncle was a poet and a filmmaker. His uncle's journals, and tried to reimagine scenes from his uncle's life. And one of the things that I found really sort of powerful about the work, besides sort of telling the story of this lovely man, is the way in which for Forrest as an artist and an intellectual, it was an opportunity for him to find someone in his family that he didn't have the benefit of growing up with, but who represents someone who was also artistic and intelligent. And it gives him a framework within his brothers, his parents, of someone in his family who shared his interests and shared his desire to be a part of that community. I'm very grateful for my friend Jerry Williams, who's not here tonight, who just one day at a Richmond Film Festival event was telling me about this show. He's like, oh my God, you've got to meet my friend Tom, who's just published this book. And so it's been an incredible honor to get to know you, and I feel like we're instant friends, which is really lovely. And so it worked out great that Tom could give us reading, and I suspect our friends of yours in here, but I'll give your little bio if that's okay for those who want to the official format of this kind of platform.
I'll tell you on the parts that I've embellished.
I'm all about that. So Thomas enjoyed a 30-year career in marketing with Philip Morris and Altria before returning from Europe to Richmond to enjoy retirement with his husband Ron. Hello, Ron. In 2016, while cleaning out a closet in their home, he rediscovered a collection of more than 100 photos from the reopening of Stonewall. After researching numerous institutions to donate these historic photos, Tom decided to set up his own archive online to share the pictures that document his first partner's unknown achievement. Over the following year, he set out to write the story behind the photos. And we're here tonight to hear a reading from Stonewall Revival, Tales of 53rd Christopher Street, and Other Theatrical Adventures. So welcome, it's a real pleasure, and I think Tom's going to give a reading and then have some Q&A, and I'm happy to also at that point answer questions about Forrest's work, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you all for coming to this first public reading from Stonewall Revival, so I very much appreciate that. I appreciate all that you've done in making this possible for me and all the folks at 1708. When I came in, when Jerry sort of hooked us up and I came in here and started looking at the exhibit, I was kind of blown away because of so many similarities. You've got an artist who has created this real, factual, and imagined storyline that runs around the room. He's done it on the basis of found photographs and film, but found photographs, and it focuses on this period post-Stonewall up and through the AIDS crisis. So I thought, my God, this is like the perfect venue to be talking about this novel. My journey started in such a similar way, finding the photographs, trying to decide what to do with them, looking for institutions to donate them to, and not finding any one that was just right. So I put up the website, and not a lot of people, when you're a single person and you're not a big communications company, getting people to come and see what you posted on a website is rather difficult. And so I decided then to write the book. My wonderful husband, Ron, has been encouraging me to write for a number of years, even from before I retired from Philip Morris and we moved back to Richmond, but I hadn't found anything that I felt competent to write about, where I would have a particular unique voice or point of view about the subject matter, until these photos emerged. And so it might be a bit odd or backwards or unconventional to be using a book to drive people to pictures. I mean, some folks might naturally say, well, I've got these 100 pictures, I'm going to use these to sell my book. I'm actually doing it the opposite way. I've created this story that talks about finding photos and what to do with them in order to drive people to see these photos of this man, my first partner. His name was Jimmy Pisano, and shortly after I met him, he decided to open up his own bar. He had worked in the bar business his whole life, and like many people in that kind of business, had that dream to have his own place one day. And so shortly after we get together, it's 1990, he signs a lease on a property, and it's at 53 Christopher Street. And we know what it is, that place is, but he decides that he's not going to open it up as Stonewall. It might surprise you to know, but at that point in time, there wasn't a whole lot of reverence around Stonewall existing as a physical place again. In fact, a lot of people, when the place opened up, really didn't pay it very much attention at all and treated it like it was any other bar. Jimmy opens this space up on the site of the original Stonewall Uprising, the place that is widely regarded as the birthplace of the gay rights movement. I write this book, and now I'm on sort of the promotional tour to try to get people to understand what Jimmy did. In press releases and in other communications that I've used talking about the book and the photos, I say that he is the forgotten footnote in the history of that place. Because certainly while the people that in 1969 refused to be harassed and refused to be put in jail anymore and fought back on a particular Friday evening, forcing the police into the bar, and they barricaded the police in the bar. Those people were the heroes that sort of started the fire. But the fact that the place didn't exist for 2 decades, it was just a myth, a memory, a symbol, until Jimmy reopens the spot. And so I start to write the book, or I start the preparation for writing the book and doing a bunch of research on it. One of the other things that I found remarkable about the comparison of this work around the room and my process of writing the book is that fully half the book is a theater fantasy sequence. It's a gay man's theater fantasy. It's wildly imagined, factually researched, but wildly imagined. And so one of the questions and one of the things I wanted to talk about, because I know some of you have read it and some of you may have not yet, is sort of thinking to yourself, what does sort of this theater fantasy or Broadway memorabilia, because I've got this 30-year collection of great stuff, what does that have to do with the revival of Stonewall? Well, what it has to do with the revival of the Stonewall Bar is that I started my personal collection of this memorabilia, these wonderful artifacts, one-of-a-kind items, scripts, props, handwritten sheet music, in the 1980s, and I've acquired all of that largely as a result of AIDS. Because it was the theater community in the 1980s and 90s that was the first and for a long time largely the only group that was doing things to help people, to raise money for research, for care, when nobody else was doing that. And so in the process of writing this, the theater elements come in, the theater fantasy and the memorabilia make their way into the story because that era is a byproduct. They are a byproduct of AIDS, and the entire story is linked to that era very definitely. This evening I'm going to try to read 2 passages for you. The first passage is the prologue, and it's titled Amuse Rouge, and that's a play on words to the culinary teaser that a chef will often send out to his or her diners before the meal to whet their appetite for what's coming. The second passage that I'll read later on is chapter 27, and it's titled, Put on Your Sunday Best. And that is sort of the payoff to the scene that is sort of foreshadowed or set up in the prologue. And in between, what I'd like to do is sort of give you the behind-the-scenes stuff, the DVD extras, in a manner of speaking, let you ask questions, whether it's about the book or the Stonewall Inn or a theater collection, perhaps. So, without further ado, I'll start with the prologue. I knew this would be the last time I'd be sitting in that fabled apartment talking with her. She was someone I had long admired, though before these encounters I'd only seen her perform very briefly late in life. Sitting here in this time, she's still young. The press will come to refer to her as a muse, her husband's muse. Tonight I try to be her muse, to inspire her, to bring hope with a simple act of charity. Some years earlier, another famous couple made this penthouse their own. William Randolph Hearst had owned several apartments in New York City, and this one atop 91 Central Park West. While it may not have been the most extravagant of the lot to someone like myself, it is jaw-dropping. The terraces alone, vast enough to accommodate hundreds of people for a cocktail party or other soiree, are film-worthy. Hearst had ensconced his mistress, Marion Davies, here and in other urban palaces with all the trappings that unlimited money could buy. But that was many years ago, before the current lady of the house took up residence. Tonight, I have her all to myself one last time. Her living room, in contrast to our attire, is informal. Plants fill the vast space, creating a verdant indoor Eden. As I finish my beer, she hurries out of sight to refresh us. She'll never receive the credit that I think she deserves for all the things she's done. She taught Marilyn to bump and grind. And well before body doubles got credit for their contribution, she had lent various parts of her anatomy, including her torso, her feet, and her behind, to some of the biggest film stars' most memorable moments on screen. But film would not be where she'd make her mark. Broadway would make her famous, and if not Hearst rich, at least very comfortable. Hearing the clinking of bottle caps as they dance across the kitchen counter, I wonder if she recalls anything from when she, at 3 years old, performed for Marion Davies at an MGM Christmas party. I won't ask about it, just knowing that it happened is satisfying enough. My eyelids are growing heavier. As before, I'll fall asleep and this episode will be over. As I soak in those last few minutes with her, I can feel one cheek rise into a half smile. She notices and asks, "What are you thinking about, honey?" Staring at the photo she's returned to me, I conjure the man who brought us together. Once upon another time, he'd brought a legend back to life. And like her, he never received the credit due. In the foreground, I hear myself say, "Nothing really, just if my friends could see me now." So that is the prologue to the story, and I wanted to share that with you for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the beginning of the book, and it's nice to start at the beginning. It's actually the very first thing I wrote after doing a solid 4 months of research on the parts of the book, mostly the parts of Stonewall's history that I hadn't become familiar with when I was involved with the bar in the 1990s. The second reason I wanted to read the prologue, and this is a spoiler alert for those of you in the room who haven't read it yet and aren't theater freaks like myself, is it gives me a chance to tell you why I've used Gwen Verdon as a vehicle for helping me talk about the reopening of Stonewall. The only reason the reopening, and Jimmy's reopening of the space is important, is because of what the people did in 1969. So I knew in writing this I would have to speak in some way about the original events. But there are several very good books by historians and things that very thoroughly capture that period of time. And I didn't want to compete with that or regurgitate stuff that other people have done. And so I was looking for a way to touch upon that era in telling about why the reopening is important and how they're linked, but in a different way than other people had done before. And so during this research, I stumbled across this photograph. And it's Times Square in 1966. And the perspective is the building where the ball drops on New Year's Eve, looking uptown, looking north. And you look at the photo, and in the right-hand corner in the distance at 47th Street, you see the marquee of the Palace Theater. And on the marquee is the signage for the opening of Sweet Charity, which had its original production that year. And so this leads me down this very unexpected path of researching Gwen Verdon. And in the process of doing that, I had known about being a legendary Broadway dancer, being in the original production of Chicago and Damn Yankees and all of that, married to Bob Fosse, but there were things that I learned about her that made me admire her more than I had as just a theater fan. There are so many things that are uncredited or undercredited about her, personally and professionally. Like literally teaching Marilyn Monroe how to walk and be Marilyn Monroe. Very few people know this. Even less well known, and what I find even more remarkable is there are these vast archives at Lincoln Center that are maintained by the New York Public Library. They preserve theater history, dance history, and music history. And in the 1970s, when the city of New York was in bankruptcy and a huge financial crisis and institutions were jettisoning all kinds of things, this archive was threatened with closing and being dispersed or sold off. And she is largely responsible for all of that stuff that sits there and that has grown into an even larger archival record of theater, dance, and music history. So, her name's not on that building, but she's largely responsible for saving that institution. And I guess as I was reading all of that, I got this connection to preserving or saving the past, or respecting the past, and also this notion of giving credit to someone who deserved it and didn't get it. And it was that connection that made me want to make her the accomplice in telling this story. And so when I would want to reflect back in the book to not the 90s period, which I knew firsthand as a witness to it, but the 60s period, it was easier to take someone like her as the accomplice to help narrate the story, to bounce the dialogue off of, because I found her to be a sympathetic character, someone who believed in saving history and went through this very same issue of never getting the full credit that I thought she deserved. So that's sort of the second long reason why I wanted to read the prologue to you. The third, and I bring this up because I know a bunch of you have already read the book. The third has to do with, I'll call them hidden references, but they're not all hidden. But throughout the book, there are numerous theater references that are dropped in. And the theater geek in me, as I'm writing this, would drop in either a piece of dialogue or a reference or some other allusion to something that if you're a theater fan, you might pick up on. Now, the chapter titles, all 30 chapters, are a piece of theater music. So, for example, Before the Parade Passes By is a chapter that's written about the original Stonewall. And it's not written from the perspective that everybody else writes about, which is the Friday evening, the riot that everyone writes about. It's written about the Sunday afternoon. After the people who were running the bar, the mafia, came back in on Saturday and sort of cleaned the place up a little bit, and on the plywood that was covering the shattered glass, wrote "open," and basically reopened the place. And even more remarkably, the police, who had been coming and routinely raiding the place and throwing people in jail on Sunday afternoon, were sitting there trying to get people to go back in because the police were being paid off by the mafia because it was illegal. And so the whole notion that there was any sort of disturbance or riot or uprising or resistance, to use a more common term from today, they didn't want that to go on because that was going to ruin the nice little system that they had all set up. So I wanted to write about that perspective on it, and given that that location, the vantage point from which the character is talking about how remarkable it is that these people are going back into a bar and the police are encouraging it after the riot 36 hours before, sort of like the marches are going to start next year and they'll run continuously every last Sunday of June up and through this coming month. And the marches will eventually be called parades because they get so large and celebratory. And so describing that moment and using "before the parade passes by" just seemed like a fitting title for that kind of a chapter. So it's not exactly a hidden message, but the sort of meaning behind it is theater related. At the end of the prologue, hopefully many of you noticed the phrasing, piece of dialogue, my friends could see me now. So there, if you weren't familiar with that song, that lyric, you would read that and it would just be an expression from one character about having a desire to be seen. If you know the theatrical reference to that, it opens up another window in terms of your understanding or appreciation or foreshadowing of other things that might be happening in the book. There's another reference in that prologue that I kind of doubt that anybody in the room, with maybe one or two possible exceptions, sort of in that general vicinity. In describing her living room as a verdant indoor Eden, the language is very specific. In part because it's a truthful statement. She had plants all around the apartment, she had this huge green thumb, and on these 3,000 square feet of penthouse terraces, she was growing tomatoes, she was like on the organic train before it was fashionable, a farm, $1 million farm in the sky. But that's not the reason for calling it a verdant indoor Eden. The reason is because in 1953, on the opening night of the Broadway musical Can-Can, this unknown dancer named Gwen Verdon literally stops the show, and the song that makes her famous is called The Garden of Eden. And according to the newspapers, the audience screamed her name until the startled actress was brought from her dressing room in her bathrobe to take a curtain call. She goes on to win 4 Tony Awards, and that little moment is the moment that turns her from the obscure, uncredited, unknown person into the person who is the star of Broadway musicals. And so there's very few people, I think, in the world who would read the book would understand where that Eden reference is meant to refer back to. I tell it to you because it's my way of also explaining how I wrote the book. I did not sit down after doing the research and outline everything to death the way I would have probably in my professional career at Philip Morris, and the way when you read about how you're supposed to write a book. that people do that. I didn't honestly know how I was going to write this story. I had done a bunch of crazy research that led me in all directions, and I had sorts of interesting things I wanted to talk about, but I did not plot out all the characters that were going to be in it and who was going to do what to who. It just sort of started and it flowed in a very organic kind of way. And I didn't want to imagine another human being actually reading it because I was relating things that were highly personal, things that I had honestly not talked about, even with my husband of a long time, or with any other human being. And so the only way to write about those passages was to pretend that the only person in the world who was ever going to read this book would be myself. And so I sat at the computer every day from like 10 in the morning till 5 at night, typing away with the understanding in my head, pretending, imagining that I'm writing this for myself. So you can write whatever you want and however you want. And because I'm a theater geek, I start inserting these little sort of theater references. Every chapter's going to have a Broadway song title. We'll figure out which one goes with which and why. Oh, let's drop in that Sondheim lyric here because it sort of fits with what the dialogue was supposed to be anyway. And some people, when they read it, they'll smile because they'll recognize that that's a Sondheim lyric. And so whenever anybody comes up to me, especially when it's a face-to-face interaction, and says that they enjoyed the book, and it's enormously gratifying, absolutely, but it's also shocking because, and I still have this visceral reaction, and if you say something in person about it, you might notice it, because there's still a part of me that still imagines myself writing it and only writing it for myself. So when another human being says, oh, I read it and I really like that, or I like that passage, or I like the way you handled this, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, another person read it. This was not part of the plan. So that's how I wanted to sort of start off. I really want you guys to have an opportunity to sort of direct the conversation or ask questions. I've got some stuff prepared that I can talk about how the timelines were structured and set up, sort of with present day stuff and the past and how they alternated and all of that, but I'd also be very happy to take a subject or topic from the audience as well, if there is someone out there that wants to throw one out. If not, we'll talk about the timelines. Because this is, I think, relevant for those of you who have read it to understand the why, and those of you who hopefully will read it to understand sort of the structure that you're getting yourself into. In the book, the present is defined as the year 2000. And there's several reasons for that. The year 2000 allows a sufficient amount of perspective to look back over the course of a decade of a relationship, of a man's opening of a bar, trying to fulfill his life's dream, the difficulties he had in maintaining or keeping that business open, the struggles he had with HIV and AIDS, his death, and sort of all the consequences of all of that. It's sufficiently after the fact to lend perspective, but not so far, like as of today, to be so far removed to not credibly be able to look back upon that period of time. The other reason is I didn't want to get anywhere near 9/11. As someone who lived in New York then, and all of us were so deeply affected by that, I didn't want to have to contend with that event in the book. So I knew it could never be past that point, because then you'd have to reflect that in everything you were writing about and doing. The last reason, and maybe the most pertinent one, is it's in the year 2000 that somebody wakes up and decides that, oh my gosh, Stonewall, we should make that a landmark. And so the application process actually starts in 98, 99, but it's literally a full 10 years after the place is reopened that anybody takes notice of it in an official capacity to designate it as a national, as a federal landmark. What that does is, in a very peculiar way, starts this bandwagon effect. And very shortly thereafter, the state of New York, and then the city, and then all kinds of other groups, most of whom don't have any legal standing to bestow anything on anything, start making, landmark status. And it's not until, I guess, 2016 that President Obama declares the area around as a U.S. national monument that sort of the final blessing on the site is made. So 2000 is sort of the present day, and it's the period of, and the present is sort of looking back over that previous decade. The past is defined essentially as the late 60s through the mid 70s, because that gives an opportunity during, I'll say, dream sequences and flashbacks to talk about before the bar gets opened by the mafia, what it's like when you'd walk in there, and then afterwards. I had a friend ask me, there's a particular passage in the book that takes place in 1975. Why did you have a scene that talked about walking into the place when it was a bagel restaurant? And the reason I do that is because if you're trying to talk about the importance of reopening a historic site, I think it's a bit more tangible to understand when it wasn't a historic site, like what that meant and what it felt like. And to sort of have a character walk in and sit down and order food and eat it in that place, you know, a bagel restaurant, I think sort of punctuates how not sacrosanct that space was treated for a very long period of time until Jimmy reopened the space. I'm often asked, I was asked back in the 90s, and even today, so it's Stonewall. Wasn't it a big success? Didn't everybody sort of go there? What was the big deal? Why was it such a difficult time? And the truth is, people think it's a gold mine, but it never was. The community largely didn't care whether it existed or not. There were loyal patrons and friends and so forth, but for the most part, it was treated like any other business on the street, like the Chinese restaurant that preceded it and the bagel shop before that. And it's a very sort of disturbing and peculiar thing for someone to sort of say, hey, this is part of your heritage, and when you celebrate marriage equality and you're standing in front and the cameras are focused on you, or when you're mourning the passing of an icon like Edie Windsor who helped make marriage equality possible, and you have this place to go to do that, and the cameras have a place to go to and film it, or when something happens in terms of civil rights and people go there to protest, regardless of where it's coming from or who it is, it boggles my mind why people don't treat the site with more respect until it's convenient to have it there for a photo opportunity or a fundraising effort. So that's my sort of little 2 cents about how underappreciated that site is, even especially in the LGBT community, where it should be more revered. I want to start leading into the second and final reading, and to do that, basically I'm going to start talking about theater again for a moment. One of the things I love about theater, and I think many of you do too, is its ephemeral, fleeting nature. It's there and then it's gone. Even if you go to see the same show over and over, it's not the same exact experience. And while there are some resourceful folks that bootleg things and put them on the internet, it's still not the exact same thing. And so in various passages in the book, I try to recreate a certain theatrical moment that happened in the past that I never attended, for the most part. Because the idea of trying to recreate something that only exists in memory, I think is just a very attractive kind of an idea. You can't do it, and you just try to imagine it as best you possibly can and convey it as best you possibly can. During the research phase, I was fortunate to discover several shows, fundraisers, theatrical events, and things of that nature that were occurring at the same time that something was happening at the original Stonewall that I wanted to talk about. And so instead of sort of doing a flashback or something and sort of like, and here's what happened in '67, and there was a jukebox and dancing, blah, blah, I wanted to go back and sort of do it through the entry or the lens of what was happening in a sort of theatrical moment of some kind. Unfortunately, I found lots of different events, and some of which I had never even heard of myself before, to do that with. So I'm going to start reading from chapter 27, which is titled Put on Your Sunday Best. And I'm not going to read the entire chapter, just the last few pages, but I need to set up the chapter for you. It's 1976, May 9th. It's at one of these remarkable events at Lincoln Center in front of the Metropolitan Opera House. And it's the event, the fundraiser that I referred to earlier in the day, earlier in speaking with you about Gwen Verdon essentially rescuing the archives at Lincoln Center. This is the event that she basically forced everybody to put on to raise the money to keep all of that open. The evening, which gets described in the book, but I'm not going to drag you through, but just to give you a taste, includes Elizabeth Taylor and Nelson Rockefeller as MCs. Paul Simon does a mini concert. Gwen Verdon and Cheetah Rivera perform 2 numbers from the musical Chicago, the original production which had just opened, and the greatest stars of the ballet world perform all night long. And so we'll walk right into the scene. This benefit, the Star Spangled Banner, is staggeringly long. As we approach the 4-hour mark, I think to myself, I'll pay another $250 just to get it to stop, as do many other patrons. Apparently, the number of empty seats grows over the course of the marathon, first with extended visits to the bar, and then with full retreats to Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue, and Sutton Place. When it's all played out, it's nearly 1 a.m. I linger in front of the Opera House for a bit, deciding what to do next. My attire and the hour limit the options, I think, but it really shouldn't matter that much in a dream. I elect to walk over to Central Park and up to 69th Street. It's a fairly mild night, maybe 50 degrees at this hour, and the streets are expectedly quiet. I stop in front of her building, closer to the corner than in the line of sight of the doorman. After maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I assume that she's already home, and this visit won't include another chance encounter. But a car pulls up, and she emerges. She notices the dapper-dressed man at the corner and makes her way toward me. "You were at the benefit tonight?" "Yes, I finally got to see you in Chicago. Well, at least do a couple of numbers." "You look the same, like you haven't aged a day since you came to Sweet Charity." It's the lighting. It's all about the lighting. I saved the pictures. I didn't want them, but I couldn't throw them away. "I had no idea. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be a problem." "I'd like to give them back to you," she says, motioning for me to follow her into the building. As we ride up the elevator, I'm amused to have found the mistake in the dream. It's the first time. I know that those pictures are safely stored in my apartment, but I choose to play along with the flawed storyline. She has me sit in the living room while she fetches the photos from somewhere out of sight. Sitting in a tuxedo in this grand apartment feels swelling it. When she returns, she delicately hands me the photos as though they were fragile. "That's your guy, Jimmy, isn't it?" "Yep, that was him in happier times." "I'm surprised that you saved them. I'm even more surprised that I'm sitting here in your apartment again after the last time. I didn't know why you left them for me, what you wanted me to do with them, and that clipping. You wanted me to do you a favor? I thought the pictures were part of that." "I left them because I wanted to show you the 2 beginnings, the riot in '69 and the revival that will come in '90. As I'm explaining this to her, I become annoyed at being dragged back into this pointless scenario of me asking Gwen Verdon for help in warning people about AIDS. The storylines become adulterated, and I don't want to be mean to her, even in a dream, but I don't want to follow this script anymore. So I start to ad-lib. "Listen, I'm grateful that you kept these for me, but none of this is real. There's no favor to do, no point in trying to change something that can't be altered. Why don't you just tell me about yourself, what's been going on, how that show came about tonight, anything else, please." My going off script seems to have taken her a little off guard, but she improvises quickly. "Well, tonight was a benefit for the library. They do important work preserving dance, and theater, and music, and, well, they don't have enough money. They were going to close. So I asked James Lipton to produce a benefit. That was your idea, I interrupt. The whole thing was your idea. It needed to get done. The library needed the money to preserve all the theater and dance history. My God, that's amazing. I mean, I've been to a lot of benefits, but never something like that. I mean, freaking Jerome Robbins created a brand new ballet with Baryshnikov for your benefit. It's unprecedented. Jimmy Lipton had helped me stage a bunch of benefits for Hall in East Hampton. I twisted his arm a little to do this. He really put it together. It's Lipton's work. Yeah, I'm sure he put it all together. And by the way, you might ask to cut it down from 4.5 hours next time. But if it wasn't for you pushing him to do this, your idea, it would not have happened. I'm just happy to make sure that all the stuff is preserved. A dancer's life is short, and when you can't dance anymore like you used to, you owe it to your craft to keep it alive. So is this your transition, your pivot? What do you mean? Never mind. I know what you mean. Chicago is the end of line for me, at least in musicals. I get it. You're older than you ever intended to be. But aren't you happy about Chicago? Aren't you enjoying it? You waited so long for it. Well, yes, but it's different when you know it's the last time. Bittersweet. Do you want something to drink? Sure, whatever you're having. I have some beer in the fridge, or if you want a real drink. Beer's fine. She disappears into the kitchen. You don't seem angry with me anymore. After an awkward silence and just the sound of 2 beer bottles opening, she re-enters the room. I wasn't angry with you, I just didn't want to hear the things you were telling me or were about to tell me. I probably shouldn't have done that. I apologize as we clink bottles. Why would anyone want to know every horrible thing that's to come? Life's hard enough as it is. Not everything that's coming is horrible. There's lots of good things too. I guess I missed that part when you insisted on telling me about people that were going to be dying. I guess I was a bit heavy-handed, but really there are good things to look forward to. The older you get, more bad things happen than good. It's just the way it is. And nobody needs to be reminded of that. What did you mean before when you said none of this is real? She returns to the script. To me, this is all a dream, a fantasy. Somewhere in the bowels of my subconscious, I must have some survivor's guilt about being alive and people who were close to me aren't. So I wrote a play in my head with you in the cast to undo all the misery. But it doesn't matter. I still don't understand you sometimes. There's been no plague. People aren't dying in the streets. I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. It's too late now anyway. The infections have started. You know, I had this dream. I saw Jimmy, my Jimmy, not Lipton. He was staring out a window, and as hard as I tried to wave at him to catch his attention, he didn't see me. Do you think the dead can see us? She looks away. Why do you want to know? To know if they're witnesses or judges to what we have or haven't done? This is going down that path again. Sorry, I whisper, taking the last swig from the bottle. I guess I'm too preoccupied with knowing whether they can see the good you're trying to do for them when they're no longer here. I'm trying to do right by Jimmy, to right a wrong. It'd be nice if he knew that. And I'm sure he does. Now I can't tell whether she's really telling me the truth or just simply a way for her to end this exchange. In either case, I know this is the last time I'll be sitting in that grand apartment. There are no more Broadway shows to dream about seeing her in. In a decade's time, Fosse dies and she devotes herself to affirming his legacy, not because someone ripped his name off of a building like was done with Jimmy Pisano, but simply to keep it alive. Listen, it's getting late, and as much as I'd like to stay, I probably should be going back. I pick up the photos and hand them back to her. I'd like you to do me a favor. I don't understand. I'd like you to keep these. I have another set back home. Why? It will help you remember the favor. I want you to do something for charity. For charity? Is that with a big C or a small c? Well, both, actually. I say, starting to rise from the couch, picking up the empty beer bottle to return to the kitchen. She takes it from me and motions for me to sit back down. What you did tonight, that amazing cooking event, it'll do so much good for so many people. At some point, you'll realize it's time to do another event for people like Jimmy. You want me to do another benefit for something that hasn't happened. Yes, that's what the pictures are for. How about another beer? She deflects. Okay, sure. When Verdon has asked me to stay for another beer, I look around the living room in my own disbelief as to where I am and what I've asked her to do. The clock reads 2:45, but the song is cut short as she returns with the beers. What are you thinking about, honey? She asks, handing me the bottle. Nothing, really, just if my friends could see me now. So that's the end of that part.